for them. Perfect. So welcome once again to these community chats. Today is November 17, 2022. And today we're going to be talking about dyslexia. And it's, I will say, not so popular condition. Maybe we don't know so much about it, but we definitely have an expert with us today. Suzanne is a passionate Davis correction facilitator, offering the full range of Davis method programs. She felt her calling to become an educator at the age of 15 after being inspired by a phenomenal teacher in high school. He appealed to all learning types and really made learning in his class incredibly motivating. So joy, self-esteem, confidence, and fun are important for learners of all ages in Suzanne's view. Suzanne has earned a BA in English with minors in psychology and sociology, double secondary teacher certification in English and German, and an MA in education. Her university education was done in Germany and the United States in the English and German languages. Suzanne is the mother of a dyslexic young adult, and she has family members who are on the autistic spectrum. Through the Davis programs, she found the programs and solutions that unlocked the severe reading and math struggles in her own child. Other family members have benefited from the concepts for life programs. Suzanne switched careers after seeing the amazing result of the Davis method for her own child and family members. Suzanne has been a licensed Davis correction facilitator since 2014 and proudly offers the full range of life-changing Davis approach programs for adults, teens, and children of all ages. So we couldn't have a better person to talk to us today about dyslexia and how you can achieve growth and joy through this deeply respectful, simple, and very empowering program that we're going to be learning about today. The mission is to help people who are labeled Asperger's or other individuals. And well, I'm not going to say more. I think that, you know, Susan, if you want to tell us something about yourself and just get your presentation started, we're really eager to learn from you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm not sure if Sandra wanted to mention this or not, but she will be taking Q&A questions. If you look down to the bottom of the screen, you're going to see the chat, then you'll see share screen, record, and next to that is Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can write them in the Q&A throughout, and then we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started here. Here we go. Yes, all righty. So as Sandra mentioned, I am a Davis dyslexia correction facilitator. I'm also a Davis autism approach facilitator right here in Upper Nyack. So I literally work 3 blocks away from the Montefiore Hospital. And so I'm just so pleased to be here at the community chats with you all. And I can't see any of you, but I know you're out there. So, and I'm eager to hear your questions. So please do answer those, you know, write those questions so that I can answer them at the end. So here we go. Davis Dyslexia Correction Programs, Reaching Potential and Restoring Self-Esteem. You heard the introduction about how I became a Davis facilitator. So I'll just move on to the next slide. I think that Sandra sent you all a handout. This is the outline of the actual presentation. And not only is it an outline of the presentation, but it is a summary of this book right here called The Gift of Dyslexia. And so you can also see where my name, Dyslexia Works New York. If anyone wants to find me on the web, you can go to Google Maps, Dyslexia Works, and then you'll see where I am. And yeah, you can find me there. So as you heard in the introduction, I came to Davis through my own family member. And it was a case where I was really questioning why my own child couldn't read. I mean, I'm a language teacher. I have a master's in education, and my own child can't read, write, or do math. So it was quite confronting. And none of that education helped me with that when it was my own child. And so through serendipity, my husband came across this book right here called The Gift of Dyslexia. It's in the suggested reading of your handout. And this book right here is sort of a manual. It was written by Ronald Davis, and it literally takes you through the program that I provide. This is what I do. It's in this book. And when I read that book, I saw my own child. And I said, oh my gosh, this is it. It was just like a light bulb went off. At that time, my child was 10 and not progressing. Although we had tried and the school tried, it wasn't working. So that's what this presentation is based on. The 3 questions on your handout are picture thinker versus word thinker. That's kind of at the core of this. What is dyslexia? It is very misunderstood in our society, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history about where that word comes from and what the Ronald Davis definition is. And this right here is very important. What is disorientation? This is what needs to be understood in order to understand the Davis method. Here are the books that are available through Ronald Davis. He first did the reading dyslexia book, The Gift of Dyslexia. That's mainly the reading. Then the second book is The Gift of Learning, because he also, the other Davis programs that are available are the Math Mastery Program, the Attention Mastery Program, the Executive Functioning Skills Program and Life Concepts, as well as the Autism Approach program. And so these books are in German. Those are just the translations. And then up here, there's the last book that Ronald Davis wrote, and that is Autism and the Seeds of Change. That's a developmental approach to autism. And I will be doing a presentation at the community chats at the Montefiore Hospital in March on that. So I hope to see some of you there as well. So if you don't have this handout printed out, you can just jot down the questions, because I will be giving you the chance to answer these questions as far as the Davis approach is concerned. So we'll start with the first one. What is dyslexia? Misunderstood, misunderstood, misunderstood. So in order to understand it a little bit, let's talk about where it came from. So the first mention of dyslexia was in the late 1800s, and that was by a doctor who made the observation that there were people coming into his practice who were otherwise fully normally developed, had no other issues, but couldn't read at all. It wasn't working. They couldn't do math. They couldn't read. And so it was an observational first definition. I think it was in 1899, somewhere around there. There was another doctor who also made an observational, so there were a couple of doctors at that time in Germany making those observational definitions of dyslexia. So as you go through the last century, the 1900s, and if you pick up a book, a dictionary, and open up, what is dyslexia? Look for that. You'll find a bunch of different definitions. It's changed a lot. And for the most part, they are things like brain damage. They tried to find a way to describe where it comes from, what the reason behind it is. And a lot of those definitions were pathological or some sort of medical reason. And now, right at this moment in time, if you are curious and you do some fact checking and you look at any state in the United States, for example, I actually did that at one point a while back, not today. Today I looked up the New York one to see the latest one. But if you look in the 50 states, you'll find 50 different variations on their definition for dyslexia used in the school systems, for example. And if you look at different countries, you'll also find different definitions. So as you can see, it's quite a variety. And, the question that I'm going to answer today, and which is on your handout there, is what is dyslexia according to Ronald Davis? Because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the Davis Dyslexia Correction Program. So I will get to that and try to cut through some of the confusion. So what we know now is that it is not brain damage. We also know that it's not a lack of intelligence, because some of the most intelligent people, in fact, that's the subtitle of the book, Why Some of the Smartest People Can't Read and How They Can Learn. We have Walt Disney here, we have Einstein, we have Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, among others that we know today who are very intelligent dyslexic individuals. It is not laziness. In fact, this person is tired because you have to work extra hard if you have word confusion as a dyslexic. It is not that they don't care. And it's not that they don't want to learn. In fact, dyslexics do want to learn, or at least they start out that way. There's many theories, and if you've had a child with dyslexia, or if you yourself are dyslexic as an adult, I work with all ages, by the way, and I get quite a few adults. I get probably half and half adults, half children, all ages. And so for the adults, they have gone through the gamut, or maybe not, depending on where they grew up. Is it the eyes? Is it the ears? Is it the brain? There's all sorts of testing that can be done if people want to have testing done. And the answer is, it's all of it together, because we are a whole person. And I'll explain that in a little while. What we do know for sure is that the curious youngster who goes into the schools or is starting to work with two-dimensional written letters and words on the page, or numerals, can very quickly go from curiosity to an ego battering experience, and their self-esteem suffers. So what we do know is that dyslexia is not related to intelligence, and it can be severe, moderate, or mild. And in my case, with my own family member, it was probably one of the most severe cases I've ever seen. So no matter where you are on the spectrum of severity, I'm not going to be worried because it's something I have experience with personally and professionally. People with dyslexia have their own personal profile and strengths and weaknesses, and no one's, everyone's different, right? Dyslexia is not only literacy, and I really want to stress this, because when I talk about being a Davis Dyslexia Correction Facilitator, people immediately think, oh, I can read. And, sometimes it's not just the reading. Sometimes it can have an overlap. What that means is you can be a dyslexic thinker, meaning a picture thinker or a visual spatial learner, still be able to read, but you might have trouble in some other areas. For example, dyspraxia, which is balance and coordination, attention, ADD, ADHD, dyscalculia, which is trouble with math, or you can also be dyslexic and autistic. So this term dyslexia, you can actually use some other terms as well in my world, in the Davis world, and that would be dyslexia could be called a picture thinker. If you don't like that word dyslexia, you could say picture thinker, or you could say visual spatial learner. And this umbrella right here is signifying that it is an umbrella term associated with the dysgraphia, which is the trouble with writing. There's also a thing called agraphia, which I have actually recently been working with and helped somebody to resolve. And that means not being able to write at all. There's dyscalculia, trouble with math, or you can have acalculia, which I've also worked with, one person who couldn't do it at all. And that's called acalculia, not being able to do it all. There's a thing called dyspraxia, which is just the balance and coordination, things like holding your pencil, tripping while walking, tying your shoes, all of those things play into the dyspraxia category. And then attention concerns, ADD, ADHD can all be underneath that umbrella of dyslexia. And in fact, there can be false diagnoses, which anyone who works as a practitioner will know that the symptoms relating can be very close indeed. Dyslexics process information differently. We do know that now from MRIs and from testing, which has been done. And we also know that the dyslexic reader is primarily utilizing the right portion of their brain while doing that. And one other point, which is very important, is that it goes way beyond phonemes. It actually goes way beyond a reading problem. So it can go into all sorts of areas. This is for example, difficulties organizing their work, time concerns, directional confusions, being able to do tasks sequentially, carrying out instructions, the poor motor skills, that's the dyspraxia, difficulty in recognizing letters, of course, and mispronunciations, distortions while reading, and also sequencing. So a lot of this having to do with the executive functioning skills, as you can see. So this I found the Society of Neuroscience. Dyslexia is an alternative way of thinking that affects 1 in 10 people of all ages in the United States. And I would like to venture to say that this is a modest guess, not guess, but let's say statistic, because of course not everyone is tested, and I would say it's more. So dyslexics are actually some of our smartest people and some of the most talented inventors. And so being dyslexic is actually a pretty cool thing, because dyslexics are very, very talented picture thinkers. They think in 3D. So if you look at this slide, you'll see that there's a differentiation between the word thinker. Those are the people who are more linear and more word-oriented. They don't have trouble with words, and a lot of times they have inner dialogues going on, so they think primarily in words. The dyslexic would be primarily thinking in pictures, and that's why I said you could substitute dyslexic for picture thinker. And the interesting thing about that is that it's 3D. It's actually 3D. It's not just pictures like you would see on the page. And of course, there's the mix. You could have sort of half and half. This is the definition that I was going to give you, and this is where you can jot this down on your handout if you have that in front of you, or on a piece of paper or something that you have there. It has 3 parts. This is Ronald Davis. He's a talented picture thinker. He's also autistic, and he is the genius who came up with these programs, not for everyone else, actually for himself, but then it was found that this could be used to help others. So his definition is that dyslexia is a product of thought, talent, and a special way of reacting to the feeling of confusion. So I want to let this sink in just a little bit, because this has 3 parts. Dyslexia is the product of thought, our thinking, right? Dyslexics are very talented, right? It is a talent to be able to think 3D and in pictures, right? That's how people can make these inventions, and how Einstein could see the whole row of the math problem in his mind by looking up in the air. And this last part is very, very interesting, because that is what's going to go into that last question called, what is disorientation? So the last part of this definition is a special way of reacting to the feeling of confusion. This special way of reacting to the feeling of confusion is something like this. A person becomes confused because they may have seen a word or heard a word that they are confused about. And then what happens is they go into a place called disorientation. They're no longer focused. They are looking out the window. They're looking at the clock to see when they can leave. They are wanting to leave the meeting. They don't want to be there anymore because they've just lost their ability to focus in that situation, whatever it was, work, school, wherever. And we're going to be talking about that later, because that is really that's the key point about this program, is that special way of reacting to confusion. So let's turn our attention to the talents side of dyslexia. The talents are that people have spatial awareness. They can read people really well, and very quickly, by the way. Be careful what you're thinking around a dyslexic, or because they'll know. Strategic planning, mechanical arts, drama and role playing, music, and by ear, inventing, designing, any kind of 3D manual skills, art, building, athletics, piloting vehicles, engineering, storytelling, and architecture. Just one quick fact, there's the Opera House. Has anyone seen that? I can't talk to you, but that was designed by a dyslexic. However, all of this talent and the picture thinking ability that the dyslexic has can be the source of a learning problem. And now I'm going to explain why. So we'll start with this little boy. Let's just play like he's dyslexic. He's one out of the 10, or 1 out of the 5 in my book, who is a picture thinker in some way or other. And he's looking at an object. He doesn't know what it is. He's very curious. And in order to figure out what this is, he's using his talent. That is his 3-dimensional thinking. And so using his talent, first he was confused, right? Then he starts using his talent, and that talent is being able to think in 3D. And he looks at it from all sides. And he's doing this while in the state of disorientation, because that's the way his mind activates to use the picture thinking ability. So let's talk about what is disorientation for a moment, and then we'll come back to the boy with the object. Disorientation. You may have felt this in the car. In fact, I was in the car with my husband this morning, and you may have also experienced that you're in the car and you're driving the car, if you drive, and you are parked at an intersection. There's a car next to you, and this car next to you inches forward. And when that happens, you have a moment of disorientation and you think you need to go. So you let off the brake, and then you realize, oh wait, my light is still red. So you were in a moment of disorientation. You were disoriented. So what is disorientation? This is the question on your handout there on the outline. And one of the most important things about this presentation is understanding this to understand the Davis dyslexia method. Disorientation is a state of mind where the mental perception does not agree with the true facts and conditions. So in the case of the lady driving the car, she let off the brake, thought she was supposed to go, and it was a disorientation. So it didn't agree with the facts and conditions. The facts and the conditions were that the light was still red and she needed to stay there until it turned green. In some people, this is an automatic response to confusion, and those people are dyslexic. So a lot of dyslexics spend either small bits of time in a place called disorientation, or they spend most of their time. You know, the more severe they are, the more time they're going to be spent in disorientation. So yeah, it really depends on the person. But in order to understand disorientation as a non-dyslexic, because there are probably some of you out there who are dyslexic and maybe some who are not, you can experience disorientation as an atypical learner. And so what can cause this for any type of thinker or learner would be strong emotions. That can cause anyone to be disoriented. Pain, severe pain, or any pain, certain drugs, optical illusions, any kind of unfamiliar sensory stimulation, and of course, confusion. So when a disorientation happens, right, it started with confusion, then you went into the next level, which is disorientation. You're not focused anymore. And in that time when you're in disorientation, some people call it la-la land, some people call it daydreaming, some people call it, you know, there's all different, zoning out. I've heard that before. You lose touch with reality for a period of time ranging from seconds to hours. Your perception becomes distorted, and during that time, you are unaware that what is being perceived is not real. So let's have a look at some examples of things that could be disorienting. And if these disorient you and you feel sick, just look away. Is this real? How many legs does this elephant have? Were you sure? And what was your first impression? Count the black dots. This one kind of, I hope you can see that well on your screen. So now we're back at the boy looking at the object. He doesn't know what it is. He's curious. He is trying to figure it out. And whenever the young dyslexic gets confused, he will disorient and start using his picture thinking ability in order to solve the confusion, because that's the way they think. That is the way they think. And the interesting thing about it is they can see it from all different sides, upside down, sideways, all different ways. So let's take this same way of thinking. This is a child looking at a 3D object, trying to figure out what it is. So now that child goes later to school and suddenly is confronted with something that they don't know what it is. It's the word cat. So when they see the word cat, they become confused. They become disoriented. And because they're disoriented, their picture thinking ability kicks in and they start seeing it in all different ways. It starts flipping around, in fact. And the interesting thing about this is I've heard people come and say, you know, I'm trying to teach this person how to read. And, you know, they saw this word on page 1, maybe the word the. And then when I turn to page 2, it's as if they've never seen that word before, or that they're looking at a new word. Well, guess what? They might be looking at something new because it can change. Yeah, that's the answer to that phenomenon. So curiosity turns to despair. When we read, we are reading for meaning. And if you look at these words, you can't get a meaning behind those. You can't get anything behind those because we don't even know what that is. And so what causes the confusion? The confusion is that we don't know what that means. We don't even know if that's a real word. All we know is that we don't know what that is. So it's very confusing. Think about the word elephant. So unfortunately, this slide is all together. So if you think in your mind and close your eyes and think about that word elephant, you might have a picture that's not on the screen. Same with bat. You might think of a bat, baseball bat, or a cricket bat. Now is your chance to think about this. What do you see in your mind when you see this word? Home, well, that's pretty easy. What about the? Did you get a picture? What about the word is? What about the word was? So the trigger words that are worked on after a program, so just to let you know, the program is a week-long program, 5 days, and afterwards there are trigger words that are done in clay to resolve the triggers, to basically eliminate the triggers. So a trigger word is a non-picture word. And the interesting thing about that is that it makes up 75% of the language. So what that means is if you look at an early reader, you'll find that 75% of the words of your typical sentence in an early reader will be non-picture words. It would be essential spelling lists or sight words for early readers, and there are 217 of them. So when you are reading and a trigger word comes up, that can cause confusion. So this is a little bit, normally it would, the slide would come one at a time, and unfortunately it's not doing that today. So we have a sentence here called "The brown horse jumped over the stone fence and ran through the pasture." That is the original sentence. So for a dyslexic, what could happen is that they read the first word and they're already confused. Confusion is because there's no picture, and so that can cause disorientation, and they might not be focused anymore. Then comes that word brown. Oh, I know brown. Yeah, brown. And then there's horse. Yeah, okay, they're back. Jumped. Got it. Yeah, brown horse jumped. Got that part. That's pretty picture friendly. But then comes over, which is a trigger word, triggering confusion, which can cause disorientation. And here comes the again. Oh no, 2 in a row. I'm really disoriented now. And then comes stone. Okay, I know stone. I'm coming back, but I'm still not feeling that well, and I really want to leave. Fence, got that. And then it all falls apart because you have 4 in a row, 4 triggers in a row, and, ran, through, and the. So you've completely lost it. You don't know what's going on. The meaning is not there anymore because you don't have a picture behind that. So then what you interpret from all this is the brown horse jumped over the stone fence, runs, throws, pasture. And so you're thinking, okay, there's a horse jumping over there, someone's running through the pasture, and there's some ball being, and then of course, how long is it till the break? They're totally confused, they're disoriented, they're sweating, they don't know what's happening, and they really don't want to be there. So how can picture thinking cause learning problems? The person sees something they don't recognize. They become confused. That feeling of confusion leads to disorientation. And remember that first slide where we were talking about where does it come from? Is it the eyes? Is it the ears? Is it, right? It is everything all at once. Because what happens when you are confused and disoriented is that it happens in your senses to the same degree equally. So that means if you're very disoriented, you are very disoriented in your sight, your hearing, your balance and coordination can be off, and your sense of time can be also skewed. It can also be very mild. It doesn't have to be severe. It can be mild, it can be moderate, it can be severe. And like I said, with the profile, it depends on who it is and what it is. So let's look at these boys reading the same book. This one boy with the thinking bubble is looking a little less happy than the other boys. So the other boys are reading, I saw a big dog. And they think, oh yeah, isn't that cute? And for some reason, this boy is disoriented already with the trigger word I. The trigger word saw flips on him because he's trying to work it out, and he suddenly thinks is that was, or is that, what is that? I was a big dog, big question mark, right? What's happening here? So what happens is they make a mistake. The incorrect data causes the individual to make mistakes, and they react. There's all different kinds of reactions. And when I see the one on the right, it reminds me of a man I actually worked with in Australia who, whenever he read an owner's manual, he literally blew his top. I mean, he started cursing. It was quite strong, his reaction to the confusion. Or they feel frustrated. You see pictures of children and adults. Like I said, this program was made by an adult for adults and works extremely well with children as well and teens. So it's just to say there's no time frame to do this. The best time to do this is when the person is motivated to do this. And usually adults are extremely motivated because they've had a lifetime of it and they're sick of it. So when people are disoriented and they are in fact dyslexic and having trouble at work, school, wherever, they have certain behaviors. One of them could be a master of disguises, become invisible, under the radar, they just don't want anyone to know. Class clown. They can be confrontational, or you have the one that is the teacher's little helper. Wow, they're just so amazing and so helpful. Can't read, but just such a nice girl. And that's all just trying to get through with ease and the least pain possible. So also compulsive solutions start happening. A compulsive solution is a behavior that has worked at least once and becomes the only way to be able to do something. Confusion triggers compulsive solution. And once these compulsive solutions start kicking in, learning stops. A compulsive solution blocks alternative experiences. Compulsive solutions are what people do to survive, to get through. So what can we do to educate? That's what I'm doing today. I'm bringing this educational presentation to you through community chats with Montefiore Hospital to help you to know that there is help for all ages. And one of the first places you can go is to read the book if you're interested, or you can also get the book. It's an audio book read by Ronald Davis. He's actually still alive. He retired after doing his last work, which was the autism book, and he spoke the actual book. So if you get the audiobook, it's a 4-hour listen. And if you get this book, you can look at the diagrams and listen to the audiobook. So let's look at the cycle of the dyslexic cycle. Starting at the top, you have the unrecognized stimulus, maybe a word, or it could be something environmental as well, actually. There's a confusion. Confusion then can lead to disorientation in some people, the dyslexics. And then there's a false sensory perception. Then mistakes are made. And then comes the emotional response, the frustration, and the downward sort of cycle there. So how to break the cycle? There's the unrecognized stimulus, the confusion, and then you can break the cycle. How? Please tell me. Well, this particular method, which I'm explaining to you today, that it exists. It's only been since the 80s as well, by the way, for those of you who are curious why you haven't heard of it. The Davis technique gives tools. So the first tool that you will get if you decide to come is focus. There's a relax or a tool called emotional release tool. There's an energy regulation tool. And then the triggers are dealt with. Triggers starting with the letters, the punctuation, and then the trigger words that I was telling you about. The, is, was, by, he, him, pronouns, some verbs. Physical coordination and balance is worked on in all programs as a honing mechanism for the tools. And there are specialized reading exercises as well associated with the program to not only work on the trigger words, but to work on the other words, which are also challenging while reading for full comprehension. So here's the cycle again. You have the unrecognized stimuli, the confusion, and instead of going down, you use your tools and get out of it. Post-program, that is. So here you are going along. It's not as if you'll never be confused in your life again, but you go along, you have a confusion, then you can use your own tools and get out and move on. And then you also know how to deal with the triggers so that that won't keep happening. Once you eliminate the triggers, they're not there anymore. And so that's really refreshing. This is a picture that shows people who are not dyslexic what it can look like for dyslexic individuals. Some people look at the page and it's literally a mess. And so making them stare at it is just painful for them. Or it just becomes out of focus, or things start scooting around. I've heard people say things come at them, literally coming off the page, because their mind is trying to use the 3D method to work out what they're being asked to look at. So since their minds are 3D, we use the 3D method to de-trigger the symbols that are associated with reading. Also in the math mastery, of course, we would use numerals. And here's an example of the clay, which is used during the program for the first portion, which is actually one of the most therapeutic portions of the program, and that is the de-triggering of the alphabet. After the alphabet has been de-triggered, then we do the punctuation. This is also using the tools and also preparing the learner for the specialized reading exercises. Then there are the specialized reading exercises, which are used for eye tracking, for ease, and also for breaking habits which are holding them back from being able to read properly. This is an example of a symbol mastery word. This is the word to. I explained to you earlier that there are trigger words involved, which are words that don't have a meaning behind them. And so for a person who doesn't have a picture behind a word, they're going to be confused, possibly go into disorientation, and then just lose the ability to put the book down and walk away. So the way it works is it's actually a very structured process. You look up the word, you find the meaning of the word, and then you model the meaning of the word, which here the word to means in the direction of, if you look up in the dictionary. And so this person has modeled in the direction of, so that's in the direction of, that you see that's using arrows for direction. And then once this is modeled, then the tools are used, and there's a special process for storing that information in the brain. This is the word the, which is actually one of the most challenging words for people. I do remember a lady I worked with in Australia who I asked her if she has a specific word she wants to work on first. And she said, the. She looked pretty, it was a serious thing for her. a serious problem, that word. And so we went through the symbol mastery steps, looking up the word, modeling the meaning of the word, and doing the symbol mastery steps. This is Ronald Davis again. And what he says about the trigger word work and the work that we do with the symbols to de-trigger the letters, if you remove the reason why the problem exists, the problem ceases to exist. So if it has been de-triggered properly, then it will not exist anymore. And that won't be a trigger. There'll be one less trigger. So if you're going along and you are able to do all of the follow-up work, and it all takes, meaning it's done properly and with intention and motivation, then the trigger will no longer exist, and that'll be one step closer to, it's really step by step. And then people can reach their full potential and restore their self-esteem. Dyslexics need certainty. Also, Ronald Davis said that dyslexia is not a complexity. It's actually a compound of simple factors, which can be dealt with step by step. So really, when I'm working with people, I say, let's just plod along slowly and surely. And that's really what it is. So this is the end of the presentation. This is just a summary of the programs that are offered through Davis Dyslexia. There's the Davis Dyslexic Correction Program, the Davis Math Mastery Program, Attention Program, and the Autism Program, which I'll be talking about in March. And there's the book again. Yeah, and I'd love to open the floor to, oh, right, one last slide. The gift of dyslexia is a true talent, and if developed, dyslexic traits result in higher than normal intelligence. I think that's the last slide. Oh, no, that's it. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. There we are.
Thank you, Susan. It was very interesting to see how people with dyslexia actually see things, right? It's easier for us to see letters, images, and all of that, but then being able to see through their eyes, I think is very eye-opening.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time for questions. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have one. Do all people with dyslexia have trouble learning?
No. In fact, I wish I could get a little more information on that general question. So the question is, do all people with dyslexia have trouble learning? Well, the answer is no. I mean, they don't have trouble learning at all. Dyslexics. Can the person who wrote that question be more specific, actually? Because
she's saying she has dyslexia and she doesn't have any trouble learning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I would love to hear a little more from you. So no, actually, you don't have trouble learning. It depends on how people learn. So that's it. So I really don't know how to answer the question because I'm not in a dialogue with the person, and I don't really know exactly what is being referred to. So the answer is no, there's no problem learning. Everyone can learn. Depending on if someone is severe or moderately dyslexic, for example, let's talk about my child. My child had no problems learning at all, especially if it was 3D, hands-on. No problem at all. I mean, he was speaking by the time he was 1. Brilliant vocabulary, nuances. You know, we actually thought we'd given birth to Einstein. I mean, we're patting ourselves on the back. But no, there's no problem at all with learning. But there's certain types of learning which is not accessible depending on what kind of dyslexia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she says, I am able to read upside down better than right side up.
Yeah, so if it's not a problem for you, then that's not a problem.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's it.
So now I'm curious because you just said there are different types of dyslexias, and I guess some people have more trouble than others. Like, can you?
Yes, so if you're talking about reading dyslexia, you can have, very severe reading dyslexia where you don't understand at all what you're reading, and you can't do it. And then you can have, math dyslexia, which I talked about the math being dyslexia being an umbrella term. Math has a lot to do with words as well. And sometimes people can read just fine, but they can't do math, and I'll say I'm a Davis dyslexia correction facilitator. Oh, I read just fine. I'm not dyslexic, but I can't do math at all. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. It's hard for me to explain to somebody, well, maybe you have math dyslexia, because they haven't associated that word math with dyslexia. And then if people say, oh, I'm ADD or I'm ADHD, I read just fine, but actually I can provide a program for exactly that as well, because that goes along with the picture thinking. So let's think about the picture thinking. Doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have trouble reading, but there could be other manifestations. I hope that helps.
Mhm. Now, how is dyslexia diagnosed?
Well, there are different ways to diagnose dyslexia. That you can go to a neuropsychologist to get there's a whole gamut of testing. If you want to know if you are dyslexic, you can come to me. I do a screening assessment. And so there's lots of dyslexia testing out in our community.
Mhm. Another question, are teachers today more aware of students with dyslexia, and are there alternative ways to learn information in the classroom that are being implemented in public schools?
Yes, that's a great question, because that's one of the reasons I became a teacher is because of Mr. Watson. Remember, I told you, or you introduced me at the beginning as being inspired by a teacher. And that was a teacher who did teach to different learning types. So there are different learning types in each classroom. And let's say you have 25 kids, you're going to have 5 maybe dyslexic learners, or let's say more visual learners or visual spatial learners. And so, yes, there are different ways to teach those learners. There is actually, I did bring this to the attention of the local school board, and there is a thing called the Davis strategies, which would be K through 3. And so instead of doing the preferred method of phonics, there's also the Davis method, which can be implemented early on. That would be a more 3D way. And that would appeal to both types of learners, which would be the linear word thinking types and the visual spatial learners. So yes, and there are schools in this country and also in other countries, but this would be a longer conversation. So if that person wants to reach out to me, dyslexiaworks.com, or you just go to Google Maps, Dyslexia Works, and I'll be happy to point you in that direction and give you links and that sort of thing.
Mhm. At what age is usually dyslexia diagnosed?
Well, diagnosed is up to the individual. So diagnosis is not mandatory. Schools want that if there's trouble and they need funding for services. But that's an interesting question, because it really depends on the region in the United States. It also depends on the school and their philosophy. So there's different philosophies around reading and diagnosis. This is not an easy question to answer as a blanket answer, because there's a lot of factors, regional factors, in which country are you in, what is the legal status once you do get a diagnosis. do people even want that diagnosis? For example, in the state of New York, the diagnosis of dyslexia wasn't even recognized up until I think the last 10 years. So it was almost impossible to get a diagnosis. And even if you do get it, what do you do with it? It's just, so this is not a super easy question to answer so easily. Some people don't want a diagnosis because they don't want their child labeled. So they, this is, like I said, a mindset. So some people would rather just get a solution rather than having but you can do it, I think, with a neuro psychologist or a psychologist, I don't know, maybe 8 years old or earlier now. With me, I personally do the screening at the age of 8. Before the age of 8, the problems associated with dyslexia may not even be cropping up yet. And also for my purposes with programs, the person has to be somewhat motivated for a change. And so while I do offer an early learning program, that's not a correction program. So the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, is a correction of the problem. And that would be starting at 8. So I personally don't do the screening until 8. I know that was not an easy answer, but I'm just trying to say it's not an easy question.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
we're running out of time, so I don't know if we have time for just one more question. If you can just answer very briefly, as mothers or parents, what kind of signs they should be looking in your children to know that they have some sort of learning issue?
Well, one thing that I can do is tell you a free testing site, and that's called testdyslexia.com. testdyslexia.com. That's a free assessment that you can do. It's 44 questions. It's free of charge. It's not an official diagnosis, of course, but those are exactly the questions that you can ask, not your child, just you as a parent. You can just do it yourself. It is not an official thing, but it's just a free screening assessment. And that way you'd say, oh yeah, there's this and there's this, and it'll kind of give you the idea. And you can also go to my website, which is dyslexiaworks.com. And there is the characteristics of dyslexia. So there's a big long list, and you just go through that list. And if you have 10 or more, or if you notice that one of your family members has 10 or more, you can pretty much know, oh yeah, they might be dyslexic, but you don't have to run and get a diagnosis. You can get a free screening. You don't have to run to get a diagnosis, because then you wouldn't have the money to actually correct the problem. That's the problem with the diagnosis. They can be very expensive. And if you have a limited income, you might want to look at a correction rather than just spend money on 20 sheets of paper.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, for involving us in this world of dyslexia, which is, very uncommon for a lot of us. And next week, no community chats. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that you really enjoy it with your families, with your loved ones. Make the best out of it, please. And instead of meeting next Thursday, what we're going to do is that we're going to be meeting on Tuesday, November 29th, where we're going to be talking about insulin. A lot of people out there might be afraid of insulin. You might not know why some people need to use insulin, especially for people with diabetes. So we're going to be talking about insulin, all the types of insulin, when it's needed, when it's not. So please join us November 29th at 12. And until then, thank you all for being here today, and happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.